Phil Jones, and tonight I'm your host. Tonight we are presenting electric vehicle infrastructure, bringing a charging station to a corner near you. Before we get started, we would like to share some online renewable energy and sustainable living coming attractions live on the last Tuesday of each month. On Tuesday, September 28th, next month, we go deeper into geothermal, the underdeveloped potential superhero of our renewable future. Jeff Tester, Professor of Sustainable Energy Systems at Cornell University, will take us on a deep dive into the small scale, medium scale, and really big scale geothermal, or as what he refers to as earth source heat, to heat your home, cities, and even to generate electricity as that critical dispatchable source of renewable energy we need to heat the entire Cornell campus with deep geothermal, where they are already cooling their whole campus using their deep lake. Then the next month, on Tuesday, October 26th, we turn our annual open mic night to the college community. Our local colleges have been working hard to coming up with ways to reduce their carbon footprints, and the results have been significant. Join us as they share their accomplishments. And if you are a college student who has something to add, we would all love to hear your input. Just email us at hello@themaria.org if you would like to participate. If you didn't get that information, please refer to our website, themarea.org for more information.
Did you send it to me?
Yes.
For tonight's program, during the presentation, your mics will be muted, but you can enter questions into the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will ask your chat questions, and with any remaining time, you are welcome to ask your additional questions directly by using the hand emoji. And please note if your mics have not been already muted.
I don't see it.
So tonight's presentation will be recorded and available in a few days on our website. Now I would like to introduce you to tonight's featured presenter, Tom Bonner. He's still getting set up, so we may have a little break, but let me just give you some background on him. He's going to speak about electric vehicle infrastructure. It's great to have that hot new electric car, but you're all dressed up with nowhere to go without access to charging. We have some charging here and there, but for many in apartments, in cities, and rural areas, it can be difficult to access a charging station where you need it. Good thing that someone has been working on it to make charging more available. And he is not just concerned about cars, but also buses and other types of vehicles. Tom Bonner serves as manager, state government affairs for PECO, the electric utility in southeastern Pennsylvania, with primary responsibility for analyzing impact policy challenges on the company and leading internal teams to develop climate and clean energy policy and business solutions. During his time with PECO, Mr. Bonner has focused on both policies and programs advancing new technologies, including serving as the lead author of PECO's $200 million Smart Grid Investment Grant with the U.S. Department of Energy. In addition to representing PECO in numerous state and local stakeholder forums, he currently serves on the board of directors of the Eastern PA Alliance for Clean Transportation. Prior to coming to PECO in 2007, he served as manager, Congressional Relations for Mid-American Energy Holdings Company, and as Associate Director of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Washington, D.C. office. From 1991 to 1995, he worked at the U.S. House of Representatives as a senior legislative staffer. Tom holds a Master's of Planning degree from the University of Virginia and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Pennsylvania. That on the screen? Okay, we're on the first slide.
All right, so if we're on slide number 2, this provides everyone a view of the most recent data we have on the distribution of electric vehicles in Pennsylvania. So this is all plug-in electric vehicles. It includes both pure battery electrics and plug-in hybrids. One DOT equals one EV, and you'll notice these are through December 2017. So this is at the earliest stage of what I would call Generation 2 electric vehicles. So the Chevy Bolt and the Tesla Model 3 had just been introduced late the year before, early 2017. So this is really your map of early adopters in Pennsylvania. As you can see, about 1/2 of the total EVs in Pennsylvania, we've seen this as a consistent trend, are in the what we would consider the 5-county Southeast PA region, with the remainder distributed. The other concentration is in Allegheny County, not surprisingly, and then the remainder distributed in a swath that really runs from Harrisburg northeast toward the Lehigh Valley. There are some clusters in other areas, not surprisingly, around State College, and then in the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area. And then the surprising cluster is in Pike County in the far northeast, which you see it's that second kind of pointing out north of the Philadelphia area into New Jersey. And the adjacent county to the south of that, while we don't have firm evidence on that, we believe that's largely commuters into New York and North Jersey in what's a growing population in that area. So that's what the EV adoption looked like with the best numbers we have at this time. We work closely with the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission and the DVRPC. They are expecting an update from the Pennsylvania Department of Motor Vehicles that they can plug into their address locator and update this map probably by the end of this year, early next year at the latest. The DVRPC has arranged a contract with the state of Pennsylvania to provide the regular EV adoption updates for the state, and we're really proud of the relationship we have with them on EVs. We've been working with them for decades and on EVs for more than 1 decade, really to the earliest date of the current generation of electric vehicles. So this is 2017. We believe there will be about twice as many EVs on the road today. The distribution would be roughly similar from everything we've seen. And when you look at the next slide, you're going to see it look at what I would say mass market adoption looks like. So this would be 5% uptake of EVs. This is based on a DVRPC forecast. And you see them really spreading to all populated areas of the state, continuing with the heaviest concentration in the Philadelphia region, but also a very heavy concentration in Allegheny County. And then that same map that runs from probably spreading out now past Adams County all the way through the northeast, through those suburbs going into New Jersey and the New York metropolitan area, with many of the same clusters in places like State College, Lewisburg, where Bucknell is, and then some of the county seats across these areas, and a pretty good concentration you see up in Erie. Now, DVRPC doesn't just record locations. They also have models working with the national leaders, maybe the global leaders, in EV forecasting and impact measurement at the University of California, Davis. Back in 2012, they did an original forecast for us about where first adopters for EVs would be located. And as we have looked back at those initial models they produced for us, they are remarkably predictive of where folks are getting EVs. The models are based on location from, it's economic data, commuting data. One key factor they look at is solar adoption, which is very indicative, especially for early adopters. And the only challenges they saw, and we saw as we look back at those models, is in very rapidly gentrifying areas in the city of Philadelphia, where census data looks backwards. They were not able to forecast some of the growth in some of the neighborhoods that have been, really gentrified and, kind of economically moved forward over the last decade. Other than that, their models were pretty close to perfect. So that's great news for us. It tells us that we work with people who can get good forecasts on this. And for us, it's very important because we need to know where new load is going to come onto our system. We believe, and we've run the numbers, on a system-wide basis, we have plenty of capacity to absorb any level of EV adoption foreseeable through 2040. The reason for that is we still have not reached our peak levels of electric load from before the 2007 Great Recession. And you're constantly building for, well, at least when that happened, we were still building for growth. So we have plenty of excess capacity on the system. But what we do have to look at is circuits and feeders, the most localized parts of the distribution system, to be able to have early notice on any constraints. As we come closer to those constraints, we will begin more aggressively offering programs that are demand-side management oriented. We just today announced and held a briefing on our new time of use rate. One of the primary targets for that time of use rate is owners of electric vehicles, to encourage them to charge their vehicles overnight. And we'll be doing more of that as we see EV adoption levels increase. So the next slide, what's our challenge? When we look at our challenge, it is about 8 key measures. 1, get the right charging solutions in the right location, charging vehicles and equipment at the right time, at the lowest capital and operating cost to meet the most needs, delivering the greatest environmental benefit while growing our economy in an accessible and equitable manner. When I say our challenge, I don't just mean PECO. I mean our challenge as a state, as a community, as a society, because the benefits of electrification, we believe, are so great from an environmental perspective and also from an economic development perspective that we need to do it and we need to get it done right. So I'll stop there and just ask if there are any quick questions either on the maps or that challenge statement. Okay, I'm hearing none. So
I
Phil,
think,
Chuck, I'm sorry.
Tom, I think we need to go through the presentation because the structure is not suitable for interruption and asking
okay.
questions.
That works just fine. My apologies. Okay, next slide, please. So I spoke about the environmental benefits for Pennsylvania. So begin by looking at CO2 emissions. And in the gray bar, you will see the CO2 emissions of the average gasoline-powered vehicle. The kind of lime green bar is a plug-in hybrid, which is operating on electric about half of the time. And it all depends on what is the range, what is the electric range of that hybrid vehicle. But this is an average one as determined by the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection and the Energy Information Agency. And then the solid green is a pure battery electric vehicle that is running off electric all the time. So in Southeast Pennsylvania, what we find is that a battery electric vehicle emits about 1/3 of the carbon emissions that a conventional internal combustion engine ICE vehicle does. Those numbers are going to be a little bit less as you move farther west in the state. But the good news, and I say this as an advocate for EVs, no matter what your fuel mix, an EV is cleaner than a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. And as our grid continues to get cleaner and be a lower carbon grid, hopefully driving toward a no carbon grid, the environmental benefits of electric vehicles will just continue to grow. In the gray bar, we also talk about some of the economic benefits of electric vehicles. So while crude oil imports are nowhere near where they were, say, back in the 1970s when we had the 2 great oil shocks, or even some of the time in the, as recently as the early 2000s or before the Great Recession, we still import about 37% of our oil. Of those imports, about 34% of them come from the Organization of Petroleum Exporting States, or OPEC. And as we know, many of those countries have kind of competing economic and geopolitical interests with the United States. Whereas in terms of electricity, virtually 100% of U.S. electric supply is domestic, and Pennsylvania is the largest net exporter of electricity in the country. When we say virtually 100%, there is some Canadian hydropower that makes it into parts of the Northeast, but other than that, our electric mix is purely domestic. We also note, while the big chart looks at carbon emissions, a even more immediate issue is conventional pollutants, things like NOx and ozone precursors that are damaging to the public health, that create issues for people with asthma, vulnerable populations, older Pennsylvanians, young Pennsylvanians. I myself have an asthmatic child, and 5.6 million Pennsylvanians live in ozone non-attainment counties, where emissions reductions through electrification would provide health benefits and also help lift economic development limitations and fuel costs. So one of the things that we've discovered as we've been advocating for electrification, and it's not really a discovery, is that every summer in Pennsylvania, in about 19 Pennsylvania counties, now maybe one or two off on that number, are Clean Air Act non-attainment counties. And of those counties, from Memorial Day through the middle of September, those counties have to use what are called summer fuel blends that increase gasoline costs anywhere from 5 to 15 cents a gallon. So when you start looking at the cost of some of the electrification infrastructure measures that we hope to see Pennsylvania encourage and adopt, they would be a fraction of the cost to the average driver of just living in a non-attainment county and having to pay for extra fuel costs with summer fuel blends. So really, it's another example of how everyone can benefit from electrification. The other thing that we always point out is that our electric grid is built for peak usage times, and through much of the time, we have excess capacity on the grid. And to the extent we can encourage customers to charge electric vehicles during those times of excess capacity, we're driving down electric costs for all customers, because rates are set on a pretty simple multiplication formula. We have the cost of operating the system, and that is paid by a combination of electric load times electric rate. So the more load you have on the system, the lower the rate, as long as you are not driving your peaks. So there are numerous economic and environmental benefits to electrification. And we'll go on later on and we'll talk about some of the challenges and constraints. So next slide, please. So as Phil pointed out, we believe electrification and our strategy on electrification goes far beyond conventional passenger vehicles. We say, if it moves, we want to electrify it. So we're seeing aggressive moves from a lot of short-haul freight deliverers, your UPSs, your Federal Expresses, Amazon, and people like the United States Postal Service to move to electrify their vehicles. They're really ideal use cases where they will travel less than 300 miles during a day, but they have consistent usage. They don't travel too far from a home charging base. And in the case of like a Postal Service vehicle, they operate on fixed routes. So we're very excited with some of the provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that are going to encourage electrification of Postal Service vehicles, and also moves to encourage electrification in the medium and heavy duty sector. Maybe less obvious is port electrification is a huge opportunity, and also a huge health opportunity for the adjacent communities. Not surprisingly, ports tend to be adjacent to environmental justice communities and densely populated areas. I'm the great nephew of many Philadelphia longshoremen that came before me, and those cranes until a couple of years ago were operating on very dirty diesel engines, and they have all now been replaced by electric cranes that are larger, more efficient, break down less, easier to maintain, and best of all, because they are larger, they can accommodate ships that the Port of Philadelphia was not able to accommodate. Really, the large modern container ships previously had to be turned around, had to come into port, have half of their cargo unloaded, go back out into the river, turn around, and come back in from the other direction to have the rest of their cargo unloaded with the old diesel cranes. Today, the electric cranes that have been installed at Philiport can now really take any modern any modern ship into the port and unload its cargo. So that's a great benefit for the region, and the adjacent neighborhoods are no longer subjected to massive amounts of diesel engines coming up, from the equipment. There is still an enormous opportunity at our ports and our airports, which have literally thousands of forklifts and ground vehicles and gator type short transports that can be electrified and are really great candidates for electrification. The challenge we have there is just the initial capital cost of installing the electric infrastructure, which is something we'll explore a little more deeply on the next slide. Waste hauling trucks are one of the top economic payback opportunities for electrification. So we expect that market to pick up very quickly. And then on buses, both passenger buses, transit buses, and then school buses, these are also excellent candidates for electrification. Now, the lifetime total cost of ownership on an EV bus is already cost competitive with a conventional internal combustion engine diesel bus. The challenge, again, is the installation of infrastructure to support those buses. It's a complex calculation of how much battery weight do you put on the bus, how much range do you get, where do you put charging in a depot, fitting that charging in a depot that was never constructed to have that level of electric load, and then potentially having en route charging to support some of the longer routes. So we've been pleased to work with the Southeastern PA Transit Authority, SEPTA, on helping develop strategies and alternatives to begin the electrification of their bus fleet. They had some challenges with their first generation buses. Quite frankly, the problem was not with the batteries, it was with the skin of the buses, and they're still continuing to work to resolve that. But SEPTA is moving forward. We've supported 2 successful federal grant applications of theirs for moving forward with electric vehicles, and we're in constant conversations with them about that. School buses are a little more challenging just because of their economics. They do not run as many miles as conventional transit buses, and they're only used seasonally. So one of the running themes we've seen in electrification is you're basically investing in a battery and then seeking to maximize the value of that battery. School buses have a lower total cost of ownership return and a longer return just because their usage is lower. So, we want to look at creative solutions to that. It was mentioned earlier that I serve on the board of the Eastern PA Alliance for Clean Transportation, which is the Clean Cities organization for the 23 counties of Eastern Pennsylvania. And they are involved in a school bus vehicle-to-grid pilot and looking and working with local school districts to help the economics by, during the summer months when these buses are going to be lightly used, treating them as grid assets that can feed power back to the grid during times of high demand on the grid. Now, there are conflicting views on vehicle to grid. I would say I'm a bit of a skeptic on vehicle to grid, especially at the current state of the technology and the current state of adoption. But I do believe that first good candidates for vehicle to grid integration. We would also say that because of both the location of a lot of these medium and heavy duty uses, ports, airports, and trucking, that I'm sorry, and buses, that electrification not only has benefits in terms of carbon emission avoided, but it can deliver very substantial benefits on the ground through the total elimination of tailpipe emissions that do produce those ozone precursors, and which result in the code orange asthma days for vulnerable populations. So a lot of benefits here in the heavier duty spaces and the what I would call industrial electrification. So next slide, please. So this is what we really one slide that we believe summarizes the challenge and the pieces that have to fit together as we look at the key factors on future EV growth. It is at least 4-factor problem of vehicles, charging equipment, market conditions, and public policy. And if I was more skilled in developing PowerPoint, I would figure out a way to overlay land use onto this chart. So when we look at vehicles, we're looking at what is the cost. People are the market for EVs is growing rapidly. They are getting closer to being cost competitive. I would say for a high volume driver, which I was before COVID, which my wife was before COVID, and now is again, EVs will pay themselves back in probably a 4 to 5 year time frame. And given the expected life of a vehicle, your total cost of ownership is already positive. Now, most people don't drive 25,000 miles a year, as my wife and I do. Most people do not currently have access to workplace charging, as both my wife and I do. So it's not there yet for everyone, but as a data point, when the first generation Chevy Volts came out, the Volts were about $18,000 above a comparable small compact four-door. The Chevy Bolt today is only about $4,000 or $5,000 more than a comparable compact vehicle of similar characteristics. Which, if you are driving even a normal 12,000 miles a year, your total cost of ownership is already positive, likely with a Chevy Bolt. It all depends on what type of car you pick for comparison purposes, but it is either very close or it's already there. Now, does that hold for everyone and every type of vehicle and everyone's driving habits? No, it does not. So, until you get there, there will be a financial challenge for many in acquiring an electric car. The second thing is there is still only the smallest imaginable market for used EVs. So we know people in lower income strata generally don't own new cars, and they are going to be, unfortunately, a bit behind people who are a little bit better off financially in getting EVs. We think that is a temporary problem, that these are actually going to be excellent vehicles for people in lower income ranges as used vehicles come to market because they're highly reliable. They, quite frankly, don't break because there's very little to break. Instead of having several hundred pieces of a conventional engine, you have a couple dozen pieces of a conventional engine in a pure battery electric hybrid. A plug-in hybrid is more complicated because they have to have all the pieces of a conventional engine and the battery system and a transmission to go back and forth. That is one reason why I think we're seeing the move to pure battery electrics move more quickly than some may have anticipated before, and potentially skipping the interim phase that many expected of, as you got to larger vehicles them first being plug-in hybrids before going to be fully electrics. But that all has to play out. The second issue is range. That same Chevy Bolt we talked about earlier had a battery range of about 38 miles. The Chevy Bolt goes at about a 270-mile range. So you're getting to a much more comfortable range for the average person to own. And that is a pure electric, and it is pretty much cost competitive as opposed to that initial big price premium. The size and features, we know Americans like big cars. They like big SUVs. They like big pickup trucks. And whatever one thinks about that, that's a reality of at least the current marketplace. We see some potential game changers out there. I think the Ford F-150 Lightning is a huge potential game changer. And we know other manufacturers, both conventional through General Motors and startups through people like Rivian, are going to be following quickly with their electric pickups. And we're seeing the crossover segment now has a number of electric options there for consumers. And in the sports car, I think the Tesla is one thing. I would credit them with many things. I'm not a Elon Musk acolyte, but I would say the perception of an electric car as a popcorn popper with no performance was pretty much destroyed by Tesla. And I think that's to everyone's benefit who's interested in electrification. We've already talked about the differences between battery electrics and plug-in hybrids. As you move to larger vehicles and different vehicle segments, are we going to have an interim phase of plug-in hybrids? It appears to me at this stage that whatever interim phase there is going to be limited and short-lived for the reason that the auto manufacturers find such efficiency in going to pure battery electrics. General Motors has a platform that they can now electrify virtually any vehicle in their fleet. Ford has taken a slightly different approach in electrifying vehicles that were market leaders and seeking to adapt other market-leading vehicles in their fleet to electrification. We'll see which business strategy wins out. And then you also have your pure electric players and some of your European auto manufacturers who will be making their decisions on those issues of plug-in hybrid versus battery electric. Surprisingly, the Japanese automakers, for the most part, are lagging behind the Americans and the Europeans, and also, the Chinese are kind of the wild card entrant in the market globally. So there's a lot to play out, but it does look like we're going to have a fairly quick and comprehensive shift toward pure battery electric vehicles. The next issue is charging equipment. How fast is needed? You need different charging speeds for different purposes. If you're putting charging in your workplace and providing it free to your employees, providing a level 1 charger, which is really just a connector to a three-prong outlet that gives someone 25 to 30 miles of range during a workday, may be adequate. If you're a high volume driver like me, and since we have 2 EVs in my household, getting a level 2 plug-in charger that charges about 27 miles an hour was a good decision. If you are a shopping mall or a grocery store that is trying to attract customers and wants to extend their stay, a level 2 charger is a better solution than a DC fast charger, which may encourage someone to just get in and get out and not stay in your store as long as you would like. When you look at corridor charging, or when you're looking at constrained space urban areas where there's going to be a premium on moving vehicles in and out and a demand by drivers for a very fast charging experience, then you're going to look at the DC fast chargers, 50 kW and up. There's some chargers out there and some vehicles that take up to 350 kW. I don't think for the purposes of a publicly accessible network of chargers, which is what we would like to see ultimately, that you have to go that high. But there are also some players in the market who are more traditional fueling station operators who would be very happy to see a 5 to 10 minute charge that instead of say a 2-minute fuel up of gasoline where you have to stay at the pump, where if you went up to a charger, plugged in for say 10 minutes, went into their store, bought some merchandise that you might not otherwise have bought, and then come back to end your charging session is really an ideal model. So that's another interesting thing there. Will your larger gas station fuel suppliers find their niche, and when? And the issue, the big issue there is going to be capacity utilization. The simple point is the more vehicles use a charging station, the more economic that charging station is. All of these decisions will be affected by installation costs. Being a level 1 charger really costs nothing. It's just a 3-prong plug. A level 2 charger in the home the equipment is about $400 to $500 for a good smart charger, and you need to run a new 220 volt line into your garage in most cases, which is probably another $700 or $800 installation. So a $1,200 or so installation. When you get to parking lots where you're having to run more line underground, those installations become more expensive. The key cost there isn't the charging unit, it's the amount of ground you have to break and the lines you have to run out to it. But you're still looking at somewhere in the range, I think the PADEP's average numbers are around $8,000 or so for installing a level 2 charger for a commercial customer. And then we talked earlier about grid impacts and capacity. We want to the greatest extent possible, keep charging out of peak periods on the grid. But if you can't set up a situation where someone who desperately needs a charge needs to pull up and wait 2 hours before they can even start their charge. So there's going to be a need for a lot of collaboration between charging equipment companies and utilities in getting good policies that encourage efficient use of the grid and lowest cost possible of charging. The next thing is market conditions. There's an old story about a dog food manufacturer that spent millions of dollars on a marketing campaign only to find that dogs simply did not like their dog food. So, the question is, do people really want these vehicles? What we're seeing increasingly, the answer to that is yes. This spring, California exceeded 11% of their new car market in electric vehicles, which is a number I don't think any of us expected to see this quickly. We're at about 2% nationally. That number is rising rapidly, and I think with the new options that are coming forward onto the market, we'll continue to see that rapid rise. And then the other issue will be what impact in addressing range anxiety and customer hesitation to buy an EV do state and federal investments in charging infrastructure create. So there is that price and total cost of ownership issue. The ironic thing is, I think very few of us buy an automobile, cash. Most of us finance them. We know what we pay for our payment every month. But we don't think about what do we pay for fuel every month. And if you just go by sticker price, adoption will be slower. If we can do education to customers, which we do provide through PICO on our website and through other means, that really look at what are your total cost of ownership. What is the price you pay for the vehicle? How much do you pay for fuel every month? What are your maintenance costs? Do you have to get an extended warranty? Because conventional vehicle warranties are nowhere near competitive with battery electric vehicle warranties. So that's another issue. We've already talked about capacity utilization. And then the issue is global markets. American automakers and European automakers are not just making electric vehicles because of what they see in the American market. We may be a lagging indicator rather than a leading indicator. As they look around the world, they know they need to electrify, and that is, they have a global imperative to move forward. The last piece of this, which I'll go over and move on, we're going to talk some more about this, is public policy. Do we as a country and as a state and a region adopt policies to help make electrification happen and overcome some of the barriers to adoption that are out there? Different tools are infrastructure investment, vehicle incentives, climate and environmental policy, and then also regulatory treatment of electric vehicles. We don't have high occupancy vehicle lanes anywhere in Pennsylvania, but in states that do, that has been a major driver toward electric vehicle adoption when those are made eligible for EV usage. The contrary point on that is we in Pennsylvania do not allow direct sale of vehicles. They have to go through dealer centers, through auto dealers. And what most EV manufacturers have figured out is they can operate more efficiently by selling vehicles off the web and minimizing that middleman cost. I apologize if anybody on the phone is an auto dealer. I had a good experience when I bought in my service center, and but it's a role that needs to be figured out. So there are a lot of questions on regulatory treatment of electric vehicles. So I hope that provides a good overview of the pieces that have to fit together to make a EV ecosystem. So next slide, please. So, as mentioned earlier, we believe the EV wave may have arrived. Plug-in sales, as I mentioned earlier, exceeded 10% in California new sales so far in 2021. The Ford F-150 Lightning and the Mustang Mach-E were really the first electrification of iconic American auto brands, and both have, based on all indications we've seen, gone over exceedingly well. The federal bipartisan infrastructure plan funding for a national charging network, while not up to the original proposal of $15 billion, will still provide about $7.5 billion for EV charging. To translate that into what we expect Pennsylvania to get from that package, it's generally about 4% of any federal funding. So you're looking in the neighborhood of $300 million to provide electric vehicle charging in Pennsylvania. And then the announcement, I believe it was at the beginning of this month, that Tesla intends to open its charging network to non-Tesla owners, which I think is it's an important data point for 2 points. One, it is the best network out there by far. And two, what it tells me is Tesla sees more value in revenue it can bring in from optimizing the use of the charging stations it has in place and the many it has planned than it does by keeping that as an exclusive benefit for EV owners. It tells me they think the larger market has arrived. So I think that's an important data point too. Next slide, please. So I am here talking as a representative from PECO, and I'll just talk briefly about what we are doing to support increased electrification. For the customer, we call ourselves the proactive enabler for complex projects. For a commercial customer that is looking to put in multiple chargers, for one of the national networks, for a Tesla, for Electrify America, for ChargePoint, for EVgo, those projects require a lot of work with the utility on all the interconnection requirements, and also to help identify where is the most cost-effective place among their options to install DC fast charging. It's also an issue a lot of our municipalities don't have a great deal of background in, but they'd like to provide some electric charging access for their citizens. And at PECO, we will work with them to help them sort through those things. We offer rebates and incentives, nothing earth-shattering. If you buy an EV and register it with us, we'll pay you a $50 incentive. And if you are a commercial customer that gets a grant from the state of Pennsylvania through the Volkswagen settlement program, we'll provide $500 per charging port as a bonus incentive there. We do have a proposal in front of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission now to do two things: to provide a $1 million incentive for transit bus electrification, and then $500,000 for commercial incentive to install level 2 chargers for fleets and other commercial applications. We're hoping to get that approval and have that program ready to go in the first quarter of 2022. We support many education and promotion events. In 2020, right before the pandemic hit, we sponsored an electric vehicle booth at the Philadelphia Auto Show. We were really thrilled with that collaboration, had thousands and thousands of customers come by to learn more about electrification, had great support from the auto show and some of the local auto dealers. And we were able to also announce the launch of a new website, which anyone who's a PECO customer can go to our website and look at how much money they would save, or what the cost of getting an electric vehicle would be, what the fuel savings would be, what the environmental benefits would be, look at the different models of vehicles that are available, look at different charging stations, connect directly to state incentives. So, we do a lot on education and promotion, and we work with our customers who are interested in seeking federal and state grants. We provide letters of support. We give them technical assistance on those applications. We do have a commitment for our own fleet to electrify 50% of our fleet vehicles by 2030. That is moving forward. That includes both. We don't have many passenger vehicles in our fleet, but we do have many service trucks. A lot of those are going to be partial electrification, where equipment will run on electric rather than battery while it is idling and doing service work in the field, which is great for the neighborhoods those vehicles are operating in, and also great for our drivers who are in the cabins of those vehicles. And then we're supporting technology pilots as similar to that school bus V2G that I mentioned earlier. For us, we're also advancing policies. We really say it's about people, programs, and policies at PECO. So we offer a discounted, our large accounts are charged based on what their peak demand usage is every month. For electric vehicle DC fast chargers, we have a demand charge reduction program that reduces the demand charges for DC fast chargers by 50%. That is in place for the next, it's for 5 years, so for 3 years more. And then we're also have been leading advocates in the state for legislative framework that will authorize utilities to make infrastructure investments to support electrification based on collaboration with transportation market experts. So that's what we're doing at PECO to encourage electrification. Next slide. Why is a matter of public policy? Should we support electrification investments? Well, there are really 5 key factors of why we make technology investments as government policy. One, we seek to achieve a public good where costs aren't fully internalized by markets. So, as I think everyone knows, on a national basis, we don't charge any fee on carbon emissions. We don't at this time in the state, and we don't in the state on mobile emissions is not proposed yet. There is a proposal to start taxing, it's not a pure tax, but for all intents and purposes, it is carbon emissions from power plants. We don't do it in the transportation sector. So there's no fee for emitting a ton of carbon. We make public investments to ensure equitable access. So it isn't just the wealthy areas that have access to charging and people who can put charging in their own homes. Sometimes I talk to EV skeptics who say, well, why should we support this? It's just going to benefit, rich Tesla drivers in Chester County. And my answer to that has been, if we don't have a plan and we don't have a commitment to solve some of the trickier challenges in other communities, I can assure you that is going to be, for a while, the only thing you have is charging available to people in more affluent circumstances. We do it to support economic development, and clearly this is a huge economic opportunity going forward, not only in cases like the port that we talked about earlier, but in attracting companies that are operating in this space. We promote new technology development, and we try to, on the utility side, build efficient systems. So one of the reasons a company like PECO is a monopoly is it was realized more than a century ago that having multiple companies stringing wires to deliver electric power to homes and businesses was not an efficient business model. So we want to have systems that are efficient and make investments wisely. Next slide. So when we think of what a regional EV infrastructure could look like, we think of corridor and downtown fast chargers. Those are able to make pretty much fully charge a vehicle in 15 to 30 minutes. We look at custom rates and/or infrastructure cost share for public purpose investments, transit and school buses, airports, industrial equipment, and fleets, where we can help those customers overcome the initial hurdle of the infrastructure investment and have them able to pay back that investment over time. Curbside, workplace, and destination charger installation and assistance with smart charging incentives. These are really those 2 to 3 hour charges that can help fill in the gaps between your high-speed network, be located in areas that really aren't compatible with DC fast chargers that are good destination locations, but also work to create managed charging systems so you're helping keep charging off the peak. So you might get a slower charge event if you're charging between 4 and 6 on a hot summer day than you would otherwise, but you're holding down the peak of that charging station. And then last, incentives for smart home charging and time of use rates to encourage that same efficient use of the grid. Next slide. So we have worked closely, and this, unfortunately, I'm a little bit outdated here. I should have updated this. The proposed bill that has been the leading legislative proposal in Pennsylvania this legislative session is actually Senate Bill 435 by Senator Bob Mensch of Montgomery County. What it calls for is creating a framework for building transportation infrastructure. I'm sorry, can somebody mute their phone, please? So what the bill proposes, it sets a state goal of increasing electrification by 50% over currently forecasted levels by 2030. It requires the development of regional electrification infrastructure frameworks for the metropolitan areas in the state. So this would apply to the Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Lehigh Valley, Harrisburg, Hershey, Lancaster, and Scranton, Wilkes-Barre areas. The more rural parts of the state that are going to be, trailing adopters do not have this requirement for the development of regional plans. It then directs electric utilities to develop infrastructure implementation plans to support investment in these networks under the oversight of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission and leaning on the expertise of the regional transportation planners. And then it also looks for recommendations on how we can promote other forms of cleaner transportation options, including compressed natural gas and hydrogen. So that bill is pending in the state Senate. It's been voted out of committee, and we're working with Senator Mensch and others and a broad coalition of groups that includes environmental organizations, chambers of commerce, auto manufacturers, bus manufacturers, fleet owners, labor, and others to encourage that bill along. So a little bit of background information on chargers that's kind of a take home for everyone. Have information on a level 1, level 2, and a DC fast charger. Information on PECO rebate programs, and then we included some references for you where you can get more information. You can learn more at the PA Department of Environmental Protection Driving PA Forward on grant programs that are available there. You can direct specific questions on the level 2 or level 3 charger programs to my friend Colton Brown at the DEP. You can learn more about the alternative fuel infrastructure grants that are also available at DEP. It's another state program for encouraging infrastructure for all types of alternative fuel vehicles. And then if you have questions for PICO about our DEP programs, my colleague Steve McGill, you can reach there. If you are applying for a PICO rebate, my colleague Cliff Krause. And then for general questions, you can visit our PICO EV Toolkit at www.pico.com/EV. And the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, as I mentioned earlier, is a wealth of resources on transportation planning and electrification. So with that, I think I held pretty close to my hour, and that gives us half an hour for questions.
Thank you very much, Tom. We'll open it up to the questions, and we have quite a few chat questions to get us started. Did someone else want to read those, or do you want me to get started with that?
Go ahead, Phil.
Okay. All right. Let's see if I'm taking these in order. I'd like to.
I don't have the chat.
Okay. So off topic, would SB 596 improve SREC payments?
For SREC payments, no, the bill is only about electric transportation infrastructure, so it is not related to solar energy. There are a wide number of bills filed in the Pennsylvania legislature to encourage more solar energy. PICO has, we're the only electric utility in the state that is currently supporting an expansion of what's called the State Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, which is the system of minimum procurements or mandatory procurements of emission-free energy that the state established in 2004. That state solar, well, the entire state AEPS has reached its peak levels that were implemented back in 2004. Those were achieved at the end of the current PJ or the previous PJM year, 2020 to 2021. They've now plateaued at, in the case of solar, at 0.5%. PICO supports increasing that up to 5.0% by 2030. So what it has taken us 17 years to achieve, we believe we can cost effectively increase by that amount every year for the next decade. We support some other changes, allowing what's called community solar, which would allow a company to build a central solar facility and then sell off subscriptions or virtual shares in that solar facility to off-site customers who either can't or don't want to put solar on their own roofs. We have had some issues with the details of this legislation. We've been working very closely and extensively with advocates of the community solar organizations, and we actually believe we're very close to an agreement with them on that. At the same time, we believe that there is a provision called net metering in Pennsylvania law that tends to shift the cost of the distribution system from more affluent customers who get solar generally to less affluent customers, that we would like to see reformed over a period of time. And if you do that, we can grow solar by using the most efficient mechanism, which is the AEPS and those SRECs, to grow solar at little or no cost to the broader customer base. So I know that's a little bit of a tangent on solar, but I figured I would, give as much information as I could.
Here's another question. I just bought my first pure EV yesterday. Hope that I am one of those red dots.
Congratulations.
Anyone have recommendations for the best? Anyone have recommendations for the best app to find EV chargers for Nissan Leaf?
Yeah, there is the PlugShare is an excellent app, and the PICO EV Toolkit also has maps of all publicly available EV charging stations in the state. PlugShare is an excellent app. I think that's the best one out there, and that will give your information on all of the different charging networks. One thing you want to do is look at which charging equipment and networks you are most likely to use, and then join those apps or acquire those apps so that when you drive up to those stations, you're able to, plug in and go. So, would encourage you to look at, the PlugShare app, and then also some of the largest companies are EVgo, ChargePoint are probably the two largest, and then Electrify America. Those provide the bulk of the publicly available, especially fast charging, in this region and most of the country.
All right. Is NDU National Drive Electric Week on the radar for EV owners who are sharing their enthusiasm, who want to be EV owners?
Excuse me, could you ask the question again?
Is NDEW, National Drive Electric Week, on your radar for EV owners who are sharing their enthusiasm with want to be EV owners? I guess that's probably more of a comment than a question. Just
absolutely. We put out communications, press releases, social media. Historically, we've held events during National Drive Electric Week. That is, more challenging as we're still, dealing with the issues of the pandemic. We do have, if anyone is interested, PECO is the sponsor in late September, on September 22nd, of the Eastern PA Alliance for Clean Transportation, EPAC. They have an event that we normally would host at PECO. It is called Tosita, the only smoke in the air barbecue. So they bring in expert speakers on clean transportation with a focus on electric, and then usually have vehicle demonstrations, ride and drive opportunities, and there's no smoke coming out of the tailpipes because it's all electric. So the only smoke is the barbecue lunch that's served. If anyone's interested in attending Tosita, please just send me your information, and we'll forward the information along to you. We're just finalizing that. We're aiming to have that down at the Navy Yard with Penn State as our host for the event.
Great. All right. Excellent. We'll have that information up on the Maria website, and if you just send it to hello@themaria.org, we'll forward it along to Tom. There was a question about the slides, and we will post the slides on the website. So if anybody wants to study those more closely, that was a question. And here's one. I just heard a story on NPR about original Leaf owners needing to replace their lithium-ion batteries after 10 years of use. The cost from Nissan is $8,000. This is more than the value of the 10-year-old car. Is there economy in these numbers?
I think the original expectation was a battery would last 8 to 10 years, and most EV batteries are warranted at about 120,000 miles. I'm not sure what the battery warranty was on those initial Leafs, but yeah, as mentioned earlier, when you buy an EV, you're basically investing in a battery. I would say that that Nissan Leaf has probably reached the end of its useful life. I hope that it was able to be driven enough that the purchaser got value out of that. But after 10 years, while batteries are lasting a lot longer than the OEMs originally expected, I think for those first generation vehicles, that was about the expectation.
Yeah, and I think as the technology evolves and the market evolves, we're going to see. I just replaced the battery in my Prius, and there was a outfit that would come around and actually install it in my driveway, a lot cheaper than going through the dealer. And that's a kind of thing that 5 years ago would not have existed. and yeah. So the same thing is going to happen with the full battery cars. There's going to be aftermarket battery services and different options of ways to go, which I expect will extend the life of electric cars.
Yeah, and I would say if you got the new battery, and you spent the $8,000 to do it, there is no reason that vehicle would no longer have, it would have a much higher value unless it's all, torn up on the inside and, dented up on the outside. That vehicle should be able to run for the life of that new battery that was installed.
Yes, Good point. And I guess you mentioned this in your presentation, but someone was concerned about recognizing the battery storage capacity in cars as being a part of the grid, so to speak, or accessible to the grid in your potential distributed buffer for the grid. Just a comment.
Yes, I'll explain my skepticism on V2G. We just talked about batteries reaching the end of their life and how when you buy an EV, you're basically buying a battery and putting a car around it. Every vehicle is going to have a finite number of cycles of that battery. Every battery is going to have a finite number of cycles. To me, I really question the economics of using up your battery for your vehicle more quickly in the hopes of doing some wholesale electric market optimization. It's just something I've a intuitive problem. I've not seen financial numbers that really seem to support it either. The other thing is just from a practical perspective is if I am likely to be driving my vehicle from 4 to 6 on a afternoon commute, the idea of, my car is going to be on the road, or when it gets home, the battery is going to be significantly depleted. Taking that battery and then putting power back onto the grid and further depleting it, I'm not sure is the ownership experience that most drivers are going to want. I do think the unique circumstance of the school bus may lend itself to V2G based on improving the economics of that bus and also when and how those buses are used. But for a passenger vehicle, I know Ford has gotten a lot of mileage in the kind of public recognition space about the V2G capabilities of the F-150 Lightning. And for a short duration outage, it might be a great thing. If you are down in Louisiana and you are using your Ford F-150 to power your home up for 2 days, at the end of that 2 days, you would not have power and you would not have a vehicle that could go anywhere. So I remain very skeptical of V2G as a mass market application.
Right. Here's a tough one that's kind of on hydrogen. Overall, it takes more than twice as much renewable energy to provide the same amount of motive power than green hydrogen instead of direct electrification. So that's why BEVs have an inherent efficiency advantage over hydrogen vehicles. The infographic above shows that this is something he's attached for chat. Shows that from generating renewable energy to using it to power a vehicle, BEVs contain a 79% efficiency rate, whereas SCEVs achieve only 25 to 35%. Because of this, green hydrogen will always be considerably more expensive fuel than renewable electricity. The Earth Justice report said it stresses that FCEVs should not be considered for passenger vehicles, buses, or light and medium duty vehicles that travel shorter distances because they can use renewable electricity more directly via batteries. Can you comment comparing EVs to hydrogen per the above article on efficiency?
Yeah, I think that is why, while maybe 10 years ago, there were a lot of the auto manufacturers who were hedging their bets on hydrogen versus electrification. I think there are a very few holdouts now, primarily some of the Japanese automakers that are still looking at a hydrogen future. We do know, the big barrier is going to be the infrastructure cost. There is a local company that I visited their operations a couple of times called PDC Machines that makes hydrogen-based machines. They even have one of their vehicles at the link here in Philadelphia for the Eagles. And there do appear to be applications where hydrogen is a useful alternative. The folks from PDC tell me most of their markets are over in Asia, in Japan, in Korea, in China. But I think there will be some applications. I do tend to agree with the commenter that I think the die has been pretty much cast for electrification as the replacement for the gasoline or diesel fired internal combustion engine.
Okay, thank you. Here's one. I read that the United States Postal Service was replacing its 30-year-old vehicles with internal combustion engines. Is EV adoption significant?
We expect that is going to be changed under the Biden administration. There was a proposed contract under the Trump administration to replace the overwhelming majority of Postal Service vehicles with a comparative startup auto manufacturer to produce those vehicles. That has been put on hold, it is my understanding, by the Biden administration. And our expectation is that the Postal Service will move forward with electrified vehicles.
Okay, very good. Here's a question. Are the buses Proterra?
The buses, the original acquisition of electric buses by SEPTA, those were Proterra buses. There's been a lot of coverage in the media about the issues that SEPTA has had with those first generation 25 Proterra buses, and they continue working toward a resolution. We talked to friends on both sides, and they're both notably constrained in what they can say, just that they are working toward a resolution on those buses. The technology on electric buses has developed very rapidly. Proterra has been, pretty much every day you will see an announcement of new transit systems acquiring Proterra buses. There are other manufacturers out there, Lion Electric, New Flyer, the big Chinese company BYD, and I think you will see, in the truck space, Mack up in Allentown is now owned by Volvo, and they are becoming a major player in electrification and building electric trucks here in Pennsylvania. So, Proterra probably gets the most attention. There are multiple other players in the EV bus market, and one that we expect to just get more robust.
Very good. Here's a question. I don't know the meeting, so hopefully it's clear to you. Any idea what Tesla plans in Texas?
I believe what they're referring to is the possibility of Tesla in the Austin area building a second manufacturing center.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that. What I meant was their submission to become to sell electricity retail.
Yes. Yeah, well, Tesla also owns the old Solar City, so they have a major solar power operation. They also have the Tesla solar battery walls. What I think they are looking at doing is becoming a electric retailer and developing customized products that include both solar energy storage and retail supply contracts, and becoming very active in that retail electric market, which is kind of the Wild West of retail electric markets. And if there is anywhere you would want to start offering that type of a product and hoping to attract a broad customer base, Texas is where you would launch that. I will editorialize for a moment. I do think the retail electric marketplace has not achieved some of the promise that was foreseen when it was adopted in Pennsylvania in 2016. And some of the innovation that was promised probably has not been delivered, which is responsible for the plateau and even some decline in customer choice on retail electric suppliers. If there's anyone out there with some of the raw material to create value-added retail electric products, it could well be Tesla. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch.
Here's a question. How about running an electric line work for a row home? I guess that gets to the larger picture with a.
It's a huge challenge. Yeah, I mean, so that's the big constraint in the urban environments, and why we think that is an area that will require special attention and some creative solutions. One of the challenges in urban neighborhoods is the more affluent ones, where you're going to have a market for EVs, and people who have the financial resources to buy an EV, especially a new one. Space is at such an enormous premium that you have to probably look at some very small spaces to wedge in charging stations, and you probably have to go to DC fast charges again, because that space is at such a premium. You'll need to be turning it over at a higher value transaction more often. Some of the alternatives you can provide, there are companies out there that do level 1 chargers that can just be connected to a utility pole or a light pole that you can charge from, that especially have been adopted in some European markets. Or, we think there's a lot of potential in looking at public spaces in urban areas. So, went through an exercise in Philadelphia where they used to allow someone who bought an EV in your very earliest phase of adoption to get an EV-only parking space in front of their home. That was repealed several years ago because neighbors got upset. Why does this guy have his own parking space and I don't? Well, technically, it wasn't his own parking space. It was an EV-only space that anybody with an EV could use. But the point remained, the public pressure in some of those neighborhoods built up to where the ability to get to install your own EV charger was taken away. Now, some of that pressure is going to be less as you're not right in front of someone's homes. So if you start looking at public parks or schools or other areas where people maybe have a little bit less sense of ownership of those parking spaces, and it's not right in front of their home, I think you can look at level 2 charging stations where people can stay for a limited amount of time, maybe 2, maybe 3 hours. And with that on a level 2, you'll get 70 to 80 miles charge, and then you move on. And trying to kind of disconnect the parking space benefit from the charging infrastructure and charging access is one of those things that remains to be worked out. But that is likely to be the last market, I think, to develop. And it's an area where we've had a lot of conversation with the city of Philadelphia. We've had a lot of conversations internally, talked to our colleagues who operate in other big cities, and you may have to have, the cities don't want to own charging stations. They say that's not our business. It's not what we do. They have had trouble finding suppliers. They can find people to sell them the equipment and the networks behind them, but they have a hard time finding somebody who actually wants to own it and operate it in an urban environment. And that's something we need to figure a solution out for.
All right, here's one that gets to the balancing, again, the electric environmental question. Is embodied carbon a major issue? One review of 50 academic studies found estimates for embodied emissions to fabricate a single EV battery range from a low of about 8 tons to as high as 20 tons of CO2. Another recent technical analysis put the range in at about 4 to 14 tons. The high end of these ranges is nearly as much CO2 as produced by the lifetime of fuel burned by an efficient conventional car. Yeah, then that's before the EV is delivered to a customer and driven its first miles. The uncertainties come from inherent and likely unresolvable variables in both the quantity and type of energy used in the battery, fuel cycle factors depending on geography and process choices, many often proprietary.
Yeah, I've seen those studies. Most reputable studies I've seen say that the production cost of an EV in terms of carbon emissions is, I believe, on the nature of maybe 15, tops 20% higher than a conventional vehicle, which is going to be easily overcome over the lifetime of that vehicle. It's an old trick in public policy world to measure one source from what they call source to sink, while your own preferred source you only measure closer to the sink, which is what I think you have seen. We'll be straightforward here. Petroleum industry interests tend to do. I would like to see them run that full analysis, going back, looking at all the emissions that are inherent in the exploration and production sector in producing a gallon of gasoline, all of the issues in refining, all of the energy costs that come with building all the steel that goes into a refinery, all the steel that goes into an oil rig and platform. I think
the
those
cement.
are dubious studies at best, although there is probably some greater amount of carbon emission in the production of the electric vehicle. It is far less than those studies have shown, and something that is easily overcome over the lifetime of the operation.
Let's see. Any chance PICO's great incentives will influence PPL?
I would say that each of the utilities in Pennsylvania watches closely what the other utilities do to get a sense of what stakeholders have an appetite to accept and what the Public Utility Commission has an appetite to accept. So I believe our friends at PPL and First Energy, and also smaller utility UGI, they just filed they have a plan pending. Our friends at Duquesne out in Pittsburgh have a plan pending. We have our case, which we're hoping to get resolution on very soon. And if we have approval for the commercial incentives that we put forward and transit incentives, it'll certainly send a signal to the other Pennsylvania utilities that there is a receptivity among both stakeholders and the commission for those types of investments.
Good. Okay. I think charging stations at restaurants and travel service plazas would be most helpful for people traveling longer distances with EVs, since most people stop every 2 to 4 hours for meals and bathroom breaks. They would benefit from fast charging during their stop. Will there be efforts to target those establishments for charging stations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this, I'm going to put on my EV owner's hat. This summer, I made 2 trips, one down to Hilton Head, South Carolina, the second up to Camden, Maine. Surprisingly, the EV charging experience was easier and more convenient on the drive down south than the drive through New England. It was not what I expected. I am a Tesla owner, so it was able to take advantage of the Tesla charging network, which were pretty much spaced at such a way that you had plenty of options. You could, exactly as the questioner suggested, stop when you would normally stop. Maybe your stop would be 10, sometimes 15 minutes longer than it would otherwise, but get fully charged at a convenient time and go on your way. No problems at all on the trip down south. Going up to Camden, Maine, the last fast charger was about 90 miles south of where my family and I were staying. So that got to be a little bit trickier, and to call some audibles on that one. And and surprisingly, much of that drive goes through Connecticut, and there was only one big Tesla fast charger. It was well located in the central part of Connecticut, but there was less access than I expected there. But you're exactly right. You want to stop. You want a place where there are other services. You want a place that is safe, that it has good lighting. So, a combination of you are seeing a lot of Wawas, a lot of Sheetz in this region, less so here in Pennsylvania, because we don't have the same incentives that a lot of our surrounding states have. But as you move through the Mid-Atlantic, as you move through New Jersey and up into New York, you'll see those convenience stores are bringing in Tesla chargers, because I suggested earlier, you don't just stop and fuel your car and go on your way. staying at the vehicle while you fuel it. You park, charge, and go into their store to make some other transaction. You want to have them in areas where there are, eating opportunities and, and other services. So you're exactly hitting the nail on the head. The good news is the people at Tesla know this. The people at Electrify America know this. The people at EVgo know this. They are competing for those site hosts, for those locations. Tesla is really the only one today who has the fully developed network with the federal incentives that, we're pretty confident are coming. What we would like to see is open access networks that are available no matter what type of vehicle you drive. And with the Tesla announcement and the money that is available federally, which we do believe is going to be limited to open access charging, we think that network will be getting built out very rapidly.
Very good. Well, that brings us to the end of our program. Did you have any concluding remarks that you wanted to make, Tom? Or?
No, I feel like I've been blabbing at you guys nonstop for an hour and a half, but I guess that's why you invited me.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate the presentation. Lots of anecdotal information that was terrific. So, as to remind everybody, this program has been recorded, and so you'll be able to view that from the Maria website, which will take you to our YouTube channel, and it'll be available in just a few days. And excuse me, go ahead.
I was just going to say, let me send you a new version of our presentation
Yes.
that puts the right bill number on our Pennsylvania Senate bill, and then feel free to share that out.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, we'll do that. And so expect that in the next day or two on the site. And then we want to make sure everyone's invited to next month on Tuesday, September 28th, when we go deeper into geothermal. So thank you all for joining us and for your wonderful questions. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care.